Thank you very much for setting the pace about accent bias. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Festus Kobna Enu. I'm currently a graduate student in higher education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the coldest place in Massachusetts. Yeah, so basically, the foundation of my research in spring 2025, I had opportunity of being at the residential spaces and also the dining hall. Then I had to meet two students who were, trying to enjoy their meal. And someone said, "Oh, you speak good English." Then the student said, "What do you mean by you speak good English? I come from Africa, Nigeria, and English has been my mode of instruction and education throughout my life." Then the other student said that that's basically a compliment. What sounds like a compliment can actually feel like an exclusion for someone who comes with multilingual background or bilingual background. So the question worth asking is that the Nigerian student asked, "Who defines good?" Then the white student said, "Oh, basically it's just a compliment that I was trying to give to you." And I realized that there was this kind of curiosity coming from both sides. They wanted to fight and other stuff. They have to step in as a residential life support person. Then I said that no one decides to talk about what is good because we all come from diverse background and every English that we speak is valued in the way that we have been instructed in. And so someone will ask me why this study matters. International students are increasing in higher education in the United States, according to NAFSA 2024. 1.2 million international students currently represent many U.S. institutions. And so, how do we support these students' linguistic background that they come from? Sometimes in the classroom, in teaching style professors, they'll be like, "Oh, the content of your paper isn't one that I expected you to bring with." So how do we try to support these students in terms of helping them to be able to linguistically fit in U.S. higher education? And so racial linguistic ideologies is something that I was looking into whilst I was coming across this research, which basically position non-white and non-English accent as deficient, amplifying racial marginalization in terms of the way that people speak and the way people sound. Now, belonging also drives retention, engagement, and success. And also, accent bias is really treated as a racial justice issue within U.S. higher education. Mostly we talk about racism, anti-racism, gender exclusion and inclusion. What happens to linguistic justice and accent? And so I see that this research is very key, especially in helping institutions, faculty members, and professionals to understand that linguistic justice is something that can be treated within U.S. higher education. And so international students with non-U.S. and non-accent English accent often face lower classroom participation, negative evaluations from peers and professors, and a weaker sense of belonging, which undermines their confidence, self-efficacy, and motivation to engage academically. And this research has been proven by Young 2024 and the rest. And so the purpose of my study was to explore how these students experience accent bias in U.S. higher education and how those experiences shape their sense of belonging, identity, classroom participation, and academic success. So these are the research questions that, per my interaction with Dr. October, I submitted to her in all the way from South Africa. We appreciate you. And so we went through these research questions for the paper that I'm currently working on. And so because I don't have much time, I want to move fast to the methodology. And so this is basically a qualitative work, and it is grounded in theory. And so I use racial linguistic theory by Flores and Rosa, and also I use intersectional frameworks to understand and examine how bias as a structural issue in U.S. higher education affects student experiences. So participants represented diverse global regions, including Africa, Asia, Middle East, Latin America, the Caribbean, and then in Europe, other parts of Europe. And we basically focused on students who have had 1 year experience within U.S. higher education because we wanted to explore more of their experiences. Now, Most of these participants were 44% master students, 39% undergrad, and 16 doctoral students. And predominantly white institutions were basically the focus of the research. The main reason being that, after reading the literature, I realized that some of these students go through these accent bias systems within these PIWEs. And so I just wanted to focus on predominantly white institutions for the research. So 86 international students across predominantly white institutions, and then we had some form of interviews with them, and then we used thematic analysis to be able to come up with themes that can really respond to these experiences that the students shared. Now, it is interesting for the next slide to note that I was able to come up with some of the phrases that these students mentioned as they face every day. Example, you speak good English. You speak English so good. You don't sound foreign. You don't have that heavy accent. You don't mispronounce like others. And the question what accent is, who do you refer to as the others? Then there's another one. You have worked extra hard to speak like this. You don't sound where you are from. You are very articulative for an international student. And these students will internalize some of these responses. They will not intend to engage within academic spaces, among their peers. They will not talk. They will not engage in any activities. And so per the experiences that these students shared, I would rather prefer being quiet in the classroom, not respond to questions so that you judge my accent. And so, as part of the results, due to the thematic analysis that we did, accent bias enforces academic silencing and reduced participation. The reason being that many students reported withholding their voices in classrooms due to fear of accent judgment. 68% avoided answering questions in class, while 56% hesitated to ask questions. And from my experiences as a Ghanaian who had my first bachelor's and master's degree from Ghana, I love to ask questions, regardless of whoever is standing in front of me teaching me. If I have questions that I need to ask, I ask, and I'm able to come up to the work that I'm doing, and I'm able to pass and do well in the class. And so what happens to a student who is facing these linguistic biases and they are not able to ask questions within the classroom? They will leave the classroom as a faculty member because they are already afraid. They will grade you well as a faculty member that you did so well for the semester, but the student didn't take anything away from your class. And so 44% also avoided group discussions. And this was very key because we realized that most of their interactions with their peers were some of the places that accent bias and accent judgment really occurred outside of the classroom, within residential spaces, within the dining halls, and then their group works and all that. Now, silence was often a protective strategy to avoid embarrassment or correction. And the way in which we correct students, one student shared an experience that he went for academic advising, and when he started talking, he's like, "Oh, you speak so well. Where did you learn how to speak English?" And then the student said, "I'm from Nigeria, and I've been instructed in English throughout my life." Then the person said, "Oh, I didn't know those people could speak English." He went on and on trying to let the student understand that this is something that he needs to talk about. But then how is the student strategically putting themselves up or setting themselves up for success in higher education? Emotional and psychological impacts are some of the themes. Students reported shame, anxiety, anger, and reduced self-confidence when their accents were mocked or corrected. Accent bias often creates anticipatory fear before speaking, limiting engagement and participation. For that matter, I'll keep quiet being in the classroom till the semester ends. It went on for us to look at other themes. Accent and identity are deeply connected. And when I read Flores and Russer's work on the ideologies around racial linguistics, Flores and Russer said that where you come from, your culture, your identity, your race are intersected in the way that people speak. And issues around colonialism also has impacted the way people speak, the diverse Englishes we have around the world. And so you have coming from somewhere in the western part of Africa, the way you speak English will be different from the way someone from northern Africa will speak. The same thing when it comes to writing. Where I come from, we write British English. And so when I'm writing program, I end it with the double ME. Yeah. Now, what happens to the one who is coming from a place where we find ourselves now that program ends with just an M? And so we need to now understand that these are issues within higher education that needs to be treated. And so Rosa and Flores said that there's a structural truth about accent bias within U.S. higher education. And it's that accent is not only linguistic, it is racialized through listening. And so therefore, their work on settling race and language toward a racial linguistic perspective in Language Society, where they published it, spoke to this. And that's why I found using that theory for my work. Now, accent bias functions not only as a communication issue, but as a racialized barrier that shapes belonging, participation, learning experiences in higher education. Then the question what accent is, what can Festus do? And so, going forward, for us to advance linguistic equity across campuses, the first thing for faculty and teaching staff, we need to rethink our participation in terms of when it comes to grading models. We need to value ideas over accent proximity to standard English, standard American English, and also normalize multilingual examples, experiences, background within the classrooms and outside of the classroom. For student affairs practitioners, in as much as this research is more focused on teaching and learning, we see an important role for us to play in there. We can create storytelling spaces like what I did about the Black students on campus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I did a program that let's talk about identity, and language was one of the key things that we talked about, that they had experiences, some of these language biases, but then how do you respond to some of them? And I used the research to be able to support the students in helping them find their belonging on campus. It's about time that we address accent macroaggressions, whether in academic advising, residential life. I've handled over 3 residential life conflict issues where it is related to accent. We need to also train professionals and graduate student staff for them to also support this work. And I developed this framework out of the research that I did that will support institutions to promote linguistic belonging and equity. First off, it starts from inclusive listening practices. We should shift responsibility from speakers to listeners by promoting empathy, patience, and critical awareness of racialized listening. There's a need for us to also focus on linguistic practice and policies. We should inculcate some of these things when it comes to the syllabi that we use, participation guidelines that faculty members grade us for, and also when it comes to institutional policies that affirm diverse Englishes. There's also a culturally responsive pedagogy that we can use when it comes to teaching and learning, and then we focus on representation and leadership. Giving space for these students to also be leading will help them to be able to help other students to find their belonging on US campuses. I will end by saying that true belonging in higher education should never depend on how someone sounds, their voice, their accent, how closely they align with dominant language norms. Hearing every voice or accent as legitimate is not kindness, it is justice. So therefore, as you leave, reflect on these questions. Thank you.
I think I've got the easiest task today as a discussant, where when you are inspired by